Namaskar and greetings to the viewers. I'm your host Uday Arya and I welcome you to Sahitya Sarovar. From today, we are starting with a series of poetry recitations, Suno Kavita. This is the first episode of Suno Kavita, and today, joining us in this session is prominent Indian poet and the author of 12 books of poetry and prose, Ma'am Arundhathi Subramaniam.
Hello
Thank you so
there.
much, ma'am, for joining us.
Happy to
It's
be
a
here.
pleasure. It's pleasure to have a session with you. And once again, I would thank you for giving us time from your busy schedule. We would begin with a question and then we'll directly go to the poetry recitation as we are very eager to hear the poetry from you. How important do you think poetry is in the contemporary times when the interest of literature is declining among the people?
How important? Is that your question?
Yes,
hmm
ma'am.
Yeah. So thank you first, Uday. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. And about poetry and its importance, I must say that there's actually, when I started writing when I was a young poet, which was in the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s, in fact, the publication of poetry was the number of books of Indian English poetry were few and far between. Today, we actually have a much better system than ever before. There are many more books being published. There are many more opportunities for young poets to be heard. The online boom has happened, so people can actually present their work online, even if they're not published on the page. So there are more avenues for poets than ever before. So I don't think that poetry is on the decline. If anything, I think the need to speak your own truth is something that many young people feel the need to do, particularly because we're living in times where we really don't know what the truth is anymore. There are so many conflicting versions all around us. So at that time, I think the need to speak your truth the way you want to speak it, is something that many people are reclaiming for themselves. So it's a good thing. And the fact that poetry is a portable form that can be carried to lit fests and to spoken word sessions all over the world makes it much more popular than ever before. Shall we move
Yes,
into the
ma'am.
reading?
Yeah, for sure. We are eager to listen the poems from you, as the name suggests, Suno Kavita. So yes.
Mhm. Okay. I was trying to sort out what poems to read for you. If there are any particular requests that you have, Uday, let me know. But I thought I
Ma'am,
would begin with, I'm sorry.
yeah, you can begin. Yes.
I thought I'd start with a poem that I wrote many years ago. It was in my second book, so it was a long time ago. But it still holds true. And in a way, it leads up to the question that you just asked, Uday, which is why on earth do we write poetry? When there aren't too many people reading it, there are not too many people queuing up to buy books of poetry, unlike the novel, which is much more popular. So, why on earth do we write poetry? And so, this is a fun take on the whole business of writing poetry. Sometimes when poets get together, they wonder why they're doing it. For a poem still unborn, over tea, we wonder why we write poetry. 10 people read it anyway. 3 are committed in advance to disliking it. 3 feel a vague pang but have leaking taps and traffic jams to think about. 2 like it and won't mind telling you so, but don't know how. Another is busy preparing questions about pat ironies and identity politics. The 10th is wondering whether you wear contact lenses. And we, as soiled as anyone else, in a world addicted to carbohydrates and conversations without pauses, still groping among sunsets and line lengths and slivers of hope, for a moment unstained by the wild contagion of habit. With that, I'd like to move to an even older poem, perhaps. This is a poem that was written in my very first book, and I think it was the very first poem or the second in my first book. I haven't read it in a very long time. And it's a poem addressed to my grandmother. It's called Heirloom. Sometimes, I think when you're young, you believe grandparents are just born old. It's difficult to imagine that they've ever had a romantic life of their own. And this is my own personal attempt, because my grandmother was very tight-lipped about these things. It's my own personal attempt to wonder about the kind of romantic life she might have had. Heirloom. My grandmother, wise even at 8, hid under her bed when her first suitor came home. Grave and serene, her features defined as majestically as a head on an old coin. I realize, through photographs clouded by the silt of seasons, like the patina of age on Kanjivaram silks, that in her day, girls of 8 didn't have broken teeth or grazed elbows. Now in her kitchen, she quietly stirs ancestral aromas of warm coconut lullabies, her voice tracing the familiar mosaic of family fables, chipped by repetition. And yet, in the languorous swirl of sari, she carries the secret of a world where naikas still walk, with the liquid tread of those who know their bodies as well as they know their minds, still glide down deserted streets to meet dark, forbidden paramours whose eyes smolder like lanterns in winter, and return before sunset, the flowers in their hair radiating the perfume of an unrecorded language of romance, the secret of a world that she refuses to bequeath, with her recipes and her genes. And from that, to leap into a more recent poem, but still not from my most recent collection. Instead, this is a poem called Transplant, which I haven't read in a very long time. And it's from my book, When God is a Traveler. And it addresses this theme that I think has been dominant in a lot of my work, and I think it has for many, many writers, the theme of belonging. Where do we really belong? Transplant. Show me a plant that's not in search of a pot, that knows whether it's meant for an orchard or a rainforest or a jam jar, that knows, for that matter, if it's a creeper or a conifer or just an upstart crocus too big for its boots. You'd think it would get clearer with time. It doesn't. And before you know it, you have just another potted palm with a raging heart of Himalayan pine, or just an old banyan asking to be a little less ancient, a little less universal, a little less absolute, a little more bloody bonsai. And in the very same book is a poem which actually goes back. It has the landscape of the poem is that of school. So I thought I would read it to you today, Uday, because we are talking to younger people as well. But it actually was suggested, but it suggested itself to me when I realized that almost every poet was slaughtered on the basis of their political preoccupations. What tribe do you belong to? What is the constituency that you belong to? What is the cause for which you are a spokesperson? This is unfortunately the way in which poetry is often received, not on the basis of just the joy of poetry itself. Often there's a tendency to categorize poets and writers. So I asked myself, what is the constituency to which I belong? Which is my tribe? And I think after a very long time, I decided this was my tribe. And maybe some of you belong to this tribe as well. I speak for those with orange lunchboxes. I speak for those with orange lunchboxes who play third tree in an orchard of 8 in the annual school play, who aren't head girls, games captains, class monitors, who watch other girls fight for the seesaw from the far wall across the sandpit, who remember everyone's lines but their own, who pelt after the school bus, their mother's breakfast still lurching in their gut, who still believe there'll be exams one day that they'll be ready for. Those with orange lunchboxes. I speak for them. And since we have time, I'm tempted to actually go back and read a poem that I wrote in my very, very first book. This was 2001 is when it was published, but it was written in the 90s. And I think it's the subject of school that brings it back to me. I'm tempted to read it because I haven't read it in probably in a decade and a half. It's called Advice to a 4-year-old on her first day of school. And I was one of those who emphatically did not enjoy school. So this is one rage poem about school. And the only thing I'll say before I read it is that there is a reference to a grammar book that generations of students had to study if they studied English. It was called Wren and Martin. And it has tyrannized many generations of students. I think, Uday, you and your contemporaries are probably free of it, but we weren't. So the reference to Wren and Martin, that's there in the book, in the poem. Advice to a 4-year-old on her first day of school. This is the sacred litany. 1. Right-hand margins, pin drop pattern writing without ruptures in the joineries, sharpened HB pencils, double finger spaces, fingers on lips. 2. Pink and white girls who can play fairies in end-of-term plays, symmetrical girls who don't stick out at odd angles in the march past, geometrical girls always equipped with compass boxes, cultivated girls with dictions manicured by militant horticulturists, musical girls who chorus "Good morning" in orchestrated D minor, soft-spoken girls with tones so hushed, it's pardonable they don't curtsy, streamlined girls who don't run into awkward lengths and 4-line report cards, ornithological girls who prefer wrens and martins to daydreaming, respectable girls who prefer daffodils to Venus flytraps, down-to-earth girls who know that boys are extraterrestrial, dumb girls who believe that Pavlov's dog will have his way. Now repeat. Okay, that was the rage poem, which was also something of a fun poem, I think. And maybe I should just conclude with a poem to my mother, because I did read the grandmother poem, and coming to the most recent collection, which is Love Without a Story, I'd like to read the poem about growing up again, but a poem addressed to my mother, which is called When Landscape Becomes Woman. I think I was 8 when I looked through a keyhole and saw my mother in the drawing room in her hibiscus silk sari, her fingers slender around a glass of iced cola. And I grew suddenly shy for not having seen her before. I knew her well, of course, serene undulation of blue malmal, wrist serrated by thin gold bangle, the gentle convexity of mole on upper right arm, and her high arched feet, better than I knew myself. And I knew her voice like running water, ice cubes in cola. But through the keyhole at the grown-up party, she was no longer geography. She seemed to know just how to incline her neck, just when to sip her swirly drink, and she understood the language of lacquered nails and baritone voices and words like emergency. I could have watched her all night. And that's how I discovered that keyholes always reveal more than doorways, that a chink in the wall is all you need to tumble into a parallel universe, that mothers are women. Thank you, Uday. I'm not sure there's time for much. If there's time for one more, I'll read you the catabolic women poem that you'd asked for. If not, we'll close this up for today.
Yes, if you could read that poem, and by that we'll conclude that one of my favorite poems, and I was having a desire to listen it from you. So
Okay, so this is actually a poem for much older people, Uday, but it could just as well be for anyone. As I often say, it's called Song for Catabolic Women, and it's addressed to anyone who's going downhill. And so perhaps not really what young people would be thinking about, but here's a possible anthem for you as you grow older. Anyone who's going downhill, but who's joyful about it. Okay? Song for Catabolic Women. We are bound for the ocean and a largesse of sky. We are not looking for the truth or living a lie. Apart, we are going downhill. The fury is almost done. We've had our fill. We are passionate, ironic, angelic, demonic, clairvoyant, rational, wildly Indian, anti-national. We're not trying to make our peace. We're not itching for a fight. We don't need your shade and we don't need your light. We know charisma isn't contagious and most rules are egregious. We're catabolic women. We've known the refuge of human arms, the comfort of bathroom floors. We've stormed out of rooms. We've thrown open the doors. We figured the tricks to turn rage into celebration. We know why the oldest god dances at every cremation. We've kissed in the rose garden. We've been the belles of the ball. We've hidden under colors and we've stood tall. We're not interested in camouflage or self-revelation, not looking for a bargain or an invitation. We're capable of stillness, even as we gallivant, capable of wisdom, even as we rant. Look into our eyes, you'll see. We're almost through. We can be kind, but we're not really thinking of you. We don't remember names and we don't do Sudoku. We're losing EQ and IQ, forgetting to say please and thank you. We are catabolic women. We've never ticked the right boxes, never filled out the form. Our dharma is tepid, our politics lukewarm. We've had enough of earnestness and indignation, but still keep the faith in conversation. We are wily Easterners enough to argue nirvana and bhakti, talk yin and yang, Shiva and Shakti. When we're denied a visa, we fall back on astral travel. And when samsara gets intense, we simply unravel. We are unbuilding now, unperpetuating, unfortifying, disintegrating. We are caterwauling, catastrophic, shambolic, cataclysmic, catabolic women. Thank you, Uday.
thank you so much, ma'am. It was indeed a wonderful pleasure to listen poems from you, a favorite poet and the favorite poems. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, Uday, and all the best with this series. It sounds like a very interesting uh, enterprise to be engaged in. All the very best for it.
Thank you. Thank you for being the inaugural guest of this series.
Thank you, Uday.